Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio. I am your host, Kelly Meehan, a citizen of the universe and a passage keeper and mentor for our new Earth children. I believe we are entering into a new psychic structure of our reality, and it is meant to embody deeper trust and ways into solid self-love and fearless integrity. Our new world energy of spirit babies needs us to consciously create within conception, trust pregnancy, and have freedom to birth and parent from innate wisdom. This is Spirit Baby Radio. Welcome to episode 199. We are in November 2024. Upgrading your fertility mind with embodiment and creating new love practices. How do you experience re-regulation of your nervous system? What does it mean to use the mind to heal? How can you access your body and mind's best opportunity for fertility? I have a special guest episode, and if you're on the YouTube channel, you will see she's here. Hello, Lauren.
Hi, Kelly.
And I'm going to read about Lauren in just a minute, but I always like to kind of check in and how we connected. I always find that so fun. Like, I think it was just through Instagram. And
Yeah, I was looking at some names of Fertility Summit and your name popped up and it spoke to me. And so I reached out to you. I also bought your book. And then I think that's how we started talking because I started reading your book and like fell in love with it like right away. And so I wanted to share that love with you.
I know. And then all of a sudden I was like, I don't know what it was. This is why I love energy just kind of does its thing. We don't, all of a sudden I'm like leaving her a voice message like I want to meet you, and then all of a sudden like I want you on my podcast. And this is my reality. I just go with the impulse of feeling, and I loved it because we had such good conversations and connections, and then I was like, oh, you got to come on my podcast, like let's get this going. And thank you for loving the book and saying that. Everybody listen.
I've been, in my own fertility circles and the women I get the chance to work with, I've been telling them all about it. And
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Awesome. I love it.
yeah.
So let me read your lovely bio here, and then we're going to kind of jump in. Lauren Enright is a former neuroscientist and school teacher turned holistic fertility coach, mindfulness, meditation, and fertility yoga teacher and birth doula. With her traditional academic background in the sciences and human behavior, nearly 2 decades of study and personal practice of mindfulness, yoga, and meditation, Lauren's approach to her work brings into harmony Western and Eastern mind-body modalities, or science and spirituality. Through a combination of belief, reprogramming, breathwork, meditation, embodied movement for nervous system and emotional regulation, Lauren has helped hundreds of women on their fertility journey reconnect with their body, process difficult emotions, regain trust that they will get and stay pregnant, and become the mother they long to be. Lauren is a visionary, optimist, and passionate heart-based leader. She loves the outdoors, good food, community, and connection bring her great joy. Whether she's teaching yoga, coaching fertility clients, or providing doula support, her goal is the same: to educate, empower, and to support you on your motherhood journey. Lovely. I love your bio. Nice.
Thank you. It's, I feel like over 5 years or
Yeah.
so, you tweak it as you go.
I love that the things that really jumped out at me was I want to talk nervous system, and I love the term emotional regulation. And I know there's a lot of science to it, and I'm sure we could bring it into easier, connection. And I'd even love to hear like there's a lot of things I want to hear. Now let me reverse a little bit. Fertility. What brought you into supporting fertility specifically? I feel like it's so specific, right? And then you do birth. We were just talking before about the birth doula-ing, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting because they're so collaborative, but they're very different spaces to be in for sure. So yeah, what brought you into fertility?
Yeah, so I think maybe my story is a little bit different than some. And it's really my answer is my heart. And yeah, just trusting my intuition and so that's basically how it began. But it was actually my work as a birth doula that brought me to my fertility work. So at the time when I had transitioned to doing the birth doula work. So I used to be a neuroscientist, like you mentioned in my bio. And then I was a high school science teacher for almost a decade. And then that's when I had my two children. And after my second was born, that's really when I made the pivot and the decision that I didn't want to go back to teaching high school and that I wanted to pursue something different. And it was actually my own birth with my son, who was my second child, that inspired me to become a birth doula. I was already teaching yoga kind of as a hobby. And so then what I did was I paired together prenatal yoga, postnatal yoga, and my birth doula work. And then that became my work. And in doing this work, it was actually the school that I had done my doula training with. They're called Mia. They're based in Toronto. So I'm in Montreal, I'm in Canada. And they had a course that was a fertility specialist certification course. And this is kind of how I've worked in my, non-academic life. So I feel like I have like my academic life, traditional academic training. And then kind of in the past few decades, it's been my non-academic life. And I just make these heart-based decisions of it just felt right. I was like, I need to take this course. And so I took that course, and they offered kind of the framework or the backbone of providing a 6-week fertility support group. And I love that concept. I love that idea. And so I just decided to jump in. And I was like, I'm going to offer a fertility support group. And that was like my first fertility offering. And that was probably about 6 years ago. And then since then, I've just kind of evolved and just gotten, deeper and deeper into the work. And I'd say today it's one of my main focuses. So I still do my birth doula work, but I've actually left teaching prenatal and postnatal yoga for right now to just really go, as they say, all in on the fertility.
I love that. The things when you said that come into my mind is that you're like the way shower for the new earth children. And I love that your heart just said, hey, we're just doing this. And I have a similar story too. My intention was pregnancy, not really the intention, but I was in pregnancy with spirit baby pre-birth communication. And then it got shifted, like it almost went pregnancy conception. And then I became a part of it. And I actually learned a lot from my clients. I knew nothing about, especially with the intervention, there's a lot that women have to and men have to go through for that. And I know what you're providing, the bigger piece is the emotional, I'd even say psychic, energetic, spiritual support. It's like that is a massive part of it. And what can you share even about that? So we talked about, I said, emotional, nervous system, so someone comes, or maybe you have a story where it's like, they're just really struggling. And it's like, maybe the doctors are like, you're never going to have a baby. And I mean, this is like the worst thing to hear. And I know a lot of women do hear that. And I know a lot of women actually overcome those, I'll call them suggestions. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
what can you
But they're
say about that?
powerful suggestions.
There
And when
you
you say
go.
suggestions, that made me think of, hypnotherapy, and how we're offered suggestions when we work with a hypnotherapist. And basically, those suggestions are beliefs that we're hoping to bypass the logical, critical mind to access the subconscious, to like implant those suggestions into the mind to shift the belief system.
Mm.
And I think this is, a big problem when, women and folks who are trying to get pregnant go and consult the Western medical system, and they are given statistics based on Western diagnosis. And, when someone in the position of power, like a fertility specialist doctor, like when they tell you that you have such and such a chance, based on statistics, that can really become, imprinted in people's minds of like being truth. When, I believe that there all are alternative truths, and that this diagnosis or this statistic is, it doesn't define you. And, because I'm in this world and this fertility space, I know and when I say so many, I'm like hundreds, like maybe thousands of, success stories of women who do end up getting pregnant, despite those odds, of what medicine has said would be the odds, right? But I think is that it can become a hurdle, a challenge, like a block to overcome when we start to approach our journey, from this belief of, oh, well, because, I've been told this is my diagnosis, or these are the statistics. It just makes it that much more challenging to get pregnant when you really believe that that's going to be your chance.
Isn't that so fascinating? Because it's so true. Like we can be so stubborn in our thoughts, or maybe old traumas are kind of coming up. And, there's that worship of like, oh, yeah, that belief, like they said it. So therefore it must be true. But it's like, well, it could be a little true. It may not be true. Like, but it's interesting how most people go into like, oh my gosh. But I think there's a journey probably in that, right? It's like the power of ourselves and healing. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, I've overcome a lot of medical suggestions of deficiencies or sicknesses and things that like, oh, uncurable. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And it makes you just kind of step back and really look at things from your own perspective. And I often say that we are our own health advocates. Like we can't, we have to be the ones that are actually doing it. But I know it feels good. Like I want someone to do it for me. And you can get help, of course. I mean, when we resonate with certain frequencies with holistic or medical support, they're frequencies. And oftentimes it's never really about what's being done. It's the energy of the person is what I'm noticing and connecting with. And so that is the space where we can open and heal to a different level. And I don't know about you, but oftentimes I feel like infertility to me is like an awakening for something else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that could be
And
self-defined too. It's not like, oh, this is your reason.
yeah, and there are, I said like about truths. Well, I like to say, okay, well, there are many truths. And so it's beginning to open to the new possibilities that, what is this here to teach me? I know it's a really
Mm.
hard thing, especially when we're struggling and we're in a lot of pain and we're really like narrowly focused on we just can't make happen the thing that we want so desperately. It's hard to like kind of take perspective and take a step back and be like, okay, like what is this here to teach me? Or, how can I see this really painful struggle as an opportunity? That's what I like to help my clients do as well, is to like shift. But I'm very well aware that that's challenging.
Yeah, and what I like to call that is alchemy. It's like, how are we
Mm.
alchemizing the struggle? It's like the opportunity. And it is really hard. You're right. Of course, it's not, we're not glossing over it. It's just kind of like, especially when it comes to loss. It's like it's not about like moving on. It's about just kind of connecting with an internal terrain that's just going to be different. I like the word different. It feels more like permission because hard things are going to happen in life, but also in the fertility journey. I'm sure you've heard a lot of different experiences of, you know, medical issues or even just high levels of doubt or now I'm curious in how, we talk about I hear a lot, I should say, in the world of self-help around breath work.
Mm.
I'd love for you to kind of define like maybe how you do that, what that connection is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to I like to educate. I have this educational background. I really love to teach. I like to take complex concepts and break them down to have people, you know, able so that people are able to easily understand things. And so I think it's important to make the distinction between breath work and what in yoga we call pranayama. So while they're both similar in that they're both working with the breath, what we see today online, like, especially with social media and all of the content that we're bombarded with if we're on social media, is like there's a more, I don't know if I would call it modern, but there just seems to be a trend towards
Mhm.
breath work, versus pranayama, which is very like an ancient tradition. Um, and while they're both working with breath, I always just make it clear that, so I'm not trained in breath work, so I can't speak to breath work, but I can speak to pranayama and how we work with the breath in what I do in my fertility yoga. I think both are, the similarities are that we're working with the breath and that we're working with the nervous system, through how we are inhaling and how we are exhaling. So this is the, tying in and infusing the science or the neuroscience, the nervous system regulation piece into breath work or pranayama. is that the inhalation is linked to your sympathetic nervous system, which is activation. And your exhalation is linked to your parasympathetic nervous system, which is that down regulation response. Right? So I like to use, a system with my students and clients where, I always say like you can't change what you're not aware of.
Mm.
Okay, so rather than just like giving them, and I think this is kind of a product of our society and world, is like we're very prescriptive. It's like here, like do this exercise, right? And then, so people will just like, and also like there's like, I know so much programming of like good girl syndrome and wanting to perform. And so like we want to be good and do the exercise as we're being taught and told, right? But I feel like it's a little bit disempowering because then we're just doing it. We don't really understand why we're doing it. And we also don't have kind of the baseline of what our natural habits and tendencies are. So the way I teach breath work or pranayama is that, I always like to get my clients to first just really become aware and recognize like what their pattern is, especially like if we're going to be doing a breathing exercise, it would be like, okay, just, pause and just notice like what is the rhythm of your breath? Is the length of your inhale, either the same, shorter, or longer than the length of your exhale. So that's one thing we do is just notice and compare, right? And then the other thing we do is notice where we feel the breath in the body. Because so often people will find that their breath is very constricted in the low abdomen and that they'll notice that they really are breathing a lot more in their chest and their heart area. So from that baseline, then we start to look to, okay, well, how can we use the breath as a tool to help us regulate? Okay, so one thing is that we want to really allow the breath to come, further down into the lower abdomen, especially into the pelvis, right? Because the pelvis is housing the reproductive organs. And so we really want to be able, the breath can also help release tension, right? So if we're breathing down into the pelvis, then we're helping to also relieve tension there. But then we're also wanting to use it as that tool to help us regulate, right? So if we notice we're in a state of upregulation, we're feeling agitated, anxious, nervous, right? Then what we can do is just really simply use a breath where we're going to start to extend the length of the exhalation and just make it so that our exhalations are longer than the inhalation. And it's very simple, right? When we can understand it, because then it becomes a tool that we can just use anywhere, anytime, rather than necessarily having to like use it. And there's nothing wrong. And I think audios and, my students use my guided meditations and these exercises all the time. But I also think it's really empowering to like, oh, I don't have to pop in like headphones right now. And oh, I can just notice that my breath feels a bit constricted. So while I'm sitting at work at my desk, I can just start to practice some longer exhalations, like as I'm writing that email.
I love
So
a lot of things you just shared. I'm like, oh, this is
yeah.
so good. You are a very good teacher, by the way.
Thank you.
I was like, wow, okay, this is really good. My brain's really comprehending that
Yeah.
because you're right. We do see a lot of like, join this breath work, like what, and what I've learned from somatic perspective, is that when we are inhaling and exhaling, we are activating the nervous system. So
Yes.
oftentimes people are like, oh, I got to breathe if I'm freaking out. And I go, that's not necessarily true, right? And we don't think about that. But as you were saying it, I was literally listening to my breath, right? This is what we do. And when
Yeah.
you said like the inhale, I was like, oh, I could see it felt a little bit more awakening. And then when I went down, I felt like I went into my body. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I don't do anything with my breath, just very rarely. I do orienting at times. And I do know what you mean. Something else I wanted to share too is like I don't know if you know Irene Lyon from she's from Canada. And
No, I don't.
she does Feldenkrais work and she does smart body, smart mind, and she's all this YouTube stuff. And she goes into the biology and she teaches you how to like, just learn about yourself. And I found in this program was really good because I learned somatic psychology 18 years ago. I laugh because I was like, I ran from it a little bit. I in my body, but I don't know how embodied I was. And I know it's just an ongoing relationship of just regulation, especially if I had pre-verbal infancy trauma, which really molded a lot of who I was, which is probably why I was attracted to that program. And and then something else you said, like again, I'm like listening to my breath because you're talking about the breath.
Yeah.
That's something when I was in practice with for quite some time, and I'm like thinking, maybe people say this, that I'm listening to my body. And then one day when I was laying there, I noticed that my breath did rise in my pelvic floor, and I was like, wow, I never was able to ever, it just wasn't in my awareness. And one day I was like, oh my gosh, it moves, with
Yeah.
my, so I was like, and I love that you shared that because I do feel like it's important in fertility, right? Especially not just natural conception, but with intervention, the body gets tight. And women don't realize that, like the ovaries, like they get like all the tissues, like it's not conscious, but just, like that. I always feel like that breath practice, that embodiment, that yoga, whatever it is, because some women will say, well, what is embodiment and what kind of practice? I go, you got to find what works for you, right? And this is the thing, we get to like experiment and experience different things. Because I know for me, it was like, I like the quiet and sitting and listening, but I know that could be hard for some people because they're thinking too much. But there's a practice in it. Like I've been doing it for quite some time, but I also like to, maybe you do this too. I don't know. I like to call out my clients if they're thinking too much with it.
Yeah,
Because
for
then it's
sure.
like it loses you. And I had a friend who's like really big visual person, and she was like, she didn't realize it felt more anxious. She realized when she went into her body and that she was
Mm,
living. Yeah. How would you address that? I'm curious what your
yeah.
perspective, like, how do
And
you,
I
yeah,
have had to address that before.
yeah.
And I think that's what we would call like a hypervigilance of the
Um,
sensations that come from the body. And what I've noticed with my clients is that we might have a certain kind of underlying level of hypervigilance at all times, but it becomes even more pronounced during the 2 week wait. So
mm,
they're on their 2 week wait. And so now they're just on the lookout for like, am I pregnant? So they're kind of over analyzing every little symptom that they have.
mm,
And so, yeah, and this is why, it's going deep into the body is not necessary. And when I say going deep, like, I don't know, we can take that, however you want to interpret it, but like, just like really know it, like draw, if we're doing a mindfulness meditation or doing a meditation and I'm guiding someone to feel every little sensation in their body,
mm,
then for some people who have trauma, for
mhm,
some people, maybe they're on their 2 week wait, like that actually is triggering. Okay? So I have a meditation, and this can be it doesn't have to be through meditation. It could really just be making sure you're noticing what you're paying attention to, and that's mindfulness, right? And so if somebody is very hyper vigilant of what's happening in their body, then what I would say is don't focus. You have to notice it and then try to divert your attention and your
mm,
focus and focus on something else. So I'll do a meditation, which is a candle meditation. Doesn't necessarily have to be a candle. It could be anything, but with eyes open.
mm,
So rather than having your focus during the meditation being on something like your breath or sensations you're feeling, you're actually having an external focus of forcing yourself to focus on the candle, which is outside of your body. So you're not paying attention to the sensations in your body. It could also be like doing something like going for a walk, a mindful walk, where you're really forcing yourself to notice all of the things in your environment. So, and then it can be helpful to add language to that. Like I'm looking at a green tree, I hear the sound of that bird, right? So then that can really help us get out of our body and then more into an external focus.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's true, like the 2 week wait, or yeah, there is such a thing. I know what you're talking about. There is such a thing of like hypervigilance, or just like almost like I have to be embodied, or that kind of pressure, like, and then what happens is you're literally in your head the whole time. You're not even in your
Yeah.
body. And that's very challenging. And I want to say that because I know those tuning in are like, oh crap, like I'm caught. But I say that with love because it's like really being aware that you don't have to always be like, I have to know everything that's happening, right, in my body. And especially when you said that, what comes up, and maybe this is an area you've supported, is birth loss.
Mhm.
And like a woman's, let's say, especially after miscarriage, there's a lot happening. And
Mhm.
and I'm often when I'm tuning into the energy field, I do notice it's not about doing something big and let's get in there. And it's like your body is going through a healing space, let's say. And it's like I do notice a lot of these women recently, I noticed they needed just their own gentle touch with themselves.
Mhm.
Nothing, just like maybe just a little hug there, or just a little just touching the belly, which can be super activating for sure. But
Mhm.
I'd love to hear, yeah, how you would even bring that into birth loss, not just miscarriage, stillbirth, termination. There's so much happening. Uh
Yeah.
when there's loss and grief and confusion and physical, emotional, spiritual.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to maybe we'll just touch on the emotional aspect that is attached to, what we are talking, loss, but also could just be fertility journey in general. It's I, it's important, and this is what I teach my clients to do, is to be able to welcome whatever painful emotion it is that they're sitting with, because often, of course, it's painful, so we want to push it aside, or we want to just override it. We want our nervous system, triggers us to want to fight it, to flee, fight or flight. We want to just run away, right? Because it's too painful to handle. But then there's also this like layer of like guilt, or of shame, of like that we shouldn't, be feeling the way we're feeling, because like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or oh, it was a long time ago and I should be able to get over it, right? And then of course that's not helpful either. So I think, and then there's also the whole culture of toxic positivity, of like, oh, like I have to be positive, and these, and we're also taught to that there are certain emotions that are good emotions, and then like other emotions are bad emotions. So just a little bit of education around like, well, there's no such thing as a good and bad emotion. Like those quote unquote bad emotions, they're simply part of the human experience. They're natural, they're normal. We're all going to experience them, at varying times, and they're there to teach us something, and they're important, right? So I think that then takes off first, like the shame. Okay, so I'm allowed to feel how I'm feeling, and then just like allowing yourself to accept. So when I walk my clients through a program that I have that's called Fertile from Within, and I lead them through a series of meditations, the first meditation is on forgiveness.
Mm.
And then the second meditation is on acceptance. And often those two bring up a lot and are challenging and difficult, but I really believe that's part of the healing process. And I believe that before we can go on to welcoming more positive emotions, that we first need to be able to accept the more quote unquote negative, or the more challenging ones that are there. And then once we can come to a place of acceptance for them, then we can start to feel like we can genuinely move on to bringing in more higher vibrational or positive emotions.
Yeah, I like what you said about forgiveness and acceptance, especially forgiveness. I think that's huge because I haven't met a woman yet in miscarriage, especially who doesn't feel like they did something wrong.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's like honestly, like if I think maybe like one person out of like thousands, really, because it's just, I feel like it's that instinctual connection of love and like I must have done something wrong. And and that's a big thing to be with. So I love that you offer that and share that in that way. And
Yeah.
acceptance of, I'm thinking what you say, acceptance, I'm thinking of acceptance of um like the space, like it's you can't change it, right? It's like it happened, right? How do you define that a little bit? I don't want to define it wrong.
Define acceptance.
Like how you bring that in that like how would you?
Yeah, well, I think it's a, if I can remember once the way I worded this, I'm like, it's almost like a acceptance is a two-part process, that before we can actually get to the point where we can accept, we have to allow.
Mm.
And
Okay.
like, so allowing, like, and I mean, maybe even before the allowing, it's recognizing like what's
Mm.
there, because I think often because of overwhelm, or just because of not necessarily having been, taught about emotions, or not having that like emotional intelligence that we talk about. And not to say that people are not intelligent, but it's just, this is also part of our upbringing and cultural, it's like cultural. So we might not even know what we're feeling, what emotion it is. And it's just like overwhelming, or we just notice that we're uncomfortable or agitated, but we can't really pinpoint what the underlying emotion is. So I think it's like first, okay, so can we put a name to it? Like I'm feeling anger, right? And then, okay, so I'm so used to resisting it and pushing it away. Well, now can I allow it? Just allow it to be there. Like we're just going to hang out with that anger for a little while. Like I don't have to befriend it. I don't
Mm.
have to totally embrace it. I'm just gonna, it's like we're tipping, putting our toes in the water. We're going treading lightly. In nervous system regulation, we call it like a titration. So we're just like going slowly to not overwhelm the system. And then once we're okay, like we can hang out with it a little bit, and then we can maybe eventually get to the point where we can actually come to full acceptance.
I love that. I'm glad I asked that because I'm thinking I have an idea. Maybe other people are like, oh, but I like allowing is like one of my favorite words to like use because it feels like it makes space for, like you
Mhm.
said, you're just like it's here. You're holding neutrality for whatever the energy is of the person without the judgment. And I really felt like when you said that, it makes me think of, and I feel like you do the same thing as when we're like, I know people use the word holding space in different ways, but that's what we're really doing to
Mhm.
like being able to even be in energy with other people that have difficult emotions is really, I think, powerful because you're not judging it, you're not fearing it. You're like, oh, it's here. Let's talk about it. Let's be with it. And
Yeah,
that's huge, I
absolutely.
feel like. I feel like that's really big. And I do feel like we have to know our own selves to do whatever the work is. Something else you said. So forgiveness, acceptance, I love that. Allowing, maybe it'll come to me. I can't remember what it was, but and I think about, yeah, speaking like we talk about loss, birth loss, but you're right. There's even infertility has grief and loss in it too. And
Absolutely.
I know when the grief space is, potent with some people, I do notice, and maybe you see this too in your culture and your world, because I know there's different energies and different rituals around death, but there's not a lot of, and I work with people around the world, so I hear a lot of different things, but it's like there's no permission
Mm.
to really be in grief. Like people don't want to be in it. And something you said about being positive, negative, I always feel like positivity, negativity are like touching each other and we move into either or like it's unrealistic to be this positive being all the time in a way where well maybe the negative is just a judgment anyways but it's like we go through different things and I almost feel like I want to see the world really like take that in more because then I feel like we stay in fleeting moments with feelings, right? It's not like we're held right by
Mhm.
certain things and we're just like okay, I'm just going to stay here in this negative space forever, even though it can feel like that. I don't want to minimize that for people. It really can, right? But it's also like, oh, how do we hold neutrality for things always change, right? And yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I find it tricky when we're working with emotions and regulating because I think it's important to let yourself feel how you're feeling, right? So we want to allow the emotion to be there, but then at the same time, it's also possible to get really caught up in it and
Yes.
have it really take over. And then, the next thing we know, we're like down this like dark spiral and we wake up and we're like, oh my gosh, how did I get here? Right. And so I think it's finding that balance between can I hold space for the emotion? Can I allow it? And at the same time, can I empower myself and help myself using certain practices to try to move myself towards how I would rather be feeling in this moment?
To me, when you say that, I think of years ago. I feel like maybe 2015 and on, there was this whole big movement of the shadow work, is what I felt like.
Mhm.
And it was
Mhm.
like, get into the shadow, get in there. But then you're like, okay, now I'm in the shadow and it's a fucking mess and I can't get out of it. And I started to realize as we're evolving in our frequencies consciously. So I like that you said that because it made me think of that, where it's like, and I've seen people do this, I'd say they worship or romance it. And
Mhm.
since I see energy I just see energy in a certain way. I call people out on it. And I say, wait, well, this is where you're leaning to depression, anxiety. This is in your field. What is this? Let's go into that. And I know in the shadow, whatever that I was doing it too. And then
Yeah.
I realized, wow, it's so dark. And I was like, what am I doing playing in these dark spaces that don't want to change?
Yeah.
Because I think I have to go in and figure it. But then
And
it's,
fix it all. But our
yeah,
clients do this.
yeah.
Well, my clients do this with fertility, and I see it. I work with a lot of, I feel like really intelligent, like cerebral women who are
Mm.
like, their professional life asks them to, really use their logical mind and analysis. And so they approach their fertility struggle like from that, like, okay, I'm going to use logic to fix this, and I'm going to analyze all the data, and I'm going to do all the research, and I'm going to figure
Yes.
it out. Right. And then what I tell my clients is that like, well, that just, reinforces the fact there's a problem, right? And so like where your attention
Mm.
goes, energy flows. And so they were just, putting more energy on the problem. And so like, can we shift away from even believe? And that's hard, of course, because again, like my clients are very like realistic. And it's like, well, of course I have a problem. How can I pretend to believe that I don't have a problem? But it's like,
Mm.
this is part of, I think, that mindset work of like, can we shift away from that and then open up to, one of my core beliefs that I like to offer everyone is like, you are complete and whole exactly as you are. And it's just remembering that and coming back to the fact that you are complete and whole.
And that's when you say that too, it's to me, it's the mental energy body. It can be
Mhm.
super active, and then it's like it can take over people's lives. And I know I've seen, a lot of different cerebral, or even if they have cerebral jobs, like
Mhm.
I see a lot of doctors, right? And a lot of MDs, and I go, okay, you can be in that space there, but then when it shifts, like are you in that all the time? Right. That's what happens. It's like, oh, I'm in that all the time. And then there's this core of strong psychic energy that then gets overanalyzed or misinterpreted. And I'm like, no, like you're missing the language of energy. And it's fascinating because I totally get that and I see that. And yet there's transformation and there's change available in the experience. And I know that's what you bring to go, okay, like question it. I always like to bring curiosity as one of my things in my programs, like because opening up the curiosity, oh, I feel like it changes the field. And
Yeah.
because, honestly, and I know people are tuning into this, we're all have certain levels of shadow negativity, and some things are very deep, but then we don't need to worship them, right? It's like, okay, like I know that me having nonverbal infancy trauma has really molded me in really horrible ways and really positive ways because I alchemized it. And it was very ingrained and it was very like, but I can't go back and go, okay. I mean, I could energetically but I'm like, what do I have to go back to? It's like I'm here now and I'm healing and I'm rising into it. So
Beautiful. I love that.
yeah. But we're kind of coming to the end here, and I want you to share that ways that people can find you and connect with you.
So I can be found on Instagram at fertile from within. And I have a free mini course that it's more of just a selection of practices. It's not really a course, but it's my mind body fertility toolkit. And so what I've done, because people who are new to this, they like to, give these practices a try. And even if you're not new to this, sometimes it's nice just to get to know somebody in a new practice or a new style. And so I offer two fertility yoga practices, two guided meditations, and two breathing exercises to help regulate your nervous system, process difficult emotions, and hopefully increase your chances of getting pregnant. So that can be found on my Fertile from Within Instagram page, and you sign up for it. It's free. I've also in that like free mini course, I provide some explanations as to how to do the practices and like why they're effective. So I invite your listeners to sign up for that if it calls to them.
I love it. Thank you so much. And how about any final words, love message to those tuning in, like really struggling with the mindset part, the body part, I know final words, that's a big conversation, but
Well, I think I I always, tell my clients that I believe that everybody, like it doesn't matter what your history is, it doesn't matter how long you've been trying. Like I really believe that it's possible that like any person who still has a cycle, or maybe even if you don't have a cycle and you're open to alternatives, right? Like if you have that longing to become a mother, like it can happen.
Mm.
And so I think because I believe it so strongly, I think that's really the power of like working with someone who like, when you're not ready to hold the belief on your own, can be really powerful to work with someone to hold the belief for you while you start to adopt it. And also just the power of community. So a lot of my clients, some come without resistance to groups, but I just know from doing this work for a while, like there's a lot of shame around infertility, and sometimes feelings of lack of safety. And so people are a little bit reluctant sometimes to join a group program and just to be seen, in their struggle. But I also really profoundly believe that it's one of the most healing practices to be seen in your pain and struggle. So, if your listeners are currently not being supported in some way, beyond family, I think it's important to also, because sometimes as much as our family may or may not be like loving, it's good to have another space where we don't feel isolated and we don't feel alone in the journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that last love statement to some inspiration. I loved it. And thank you for joining us here today.
You're welcome, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for joining episode 199, Upgrading Your Fertility Mind with Embodiment and Creating New Love Practices. Thank you for joining Spirit Baby Radio with your host, me, Kelly Meehan. Please join my community and stay in touch with monthly energy rants, Spirit Baby poetry, and get access to Spirit Baby 101 with tips and practices at my newsletter at newearthchildren.com, and join me on Instagram with lives at Spirit Baby Medium, and join the Mighty Networks, the Spirit Baby Collective membership, and Motherhood to Mediumship. Remember, you are the heart that holds communication, and it is your time to connect. Come share in the great shift of your mind and the true spirit of your heart with Spirit Baby Communication.